Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Cursed Conversations. For today's episode, I will be your host, Sophie.
And I'll be your co-host, Angela.
Today, we will be talking about the case of Jeffrey Dahmer, a very infamous case in America. Jeffrey Leon Dahmer was also notoriously known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. He was an American serial killer and sex offender who has killed and dismembered 17 men and boys between the years 1978 to 1991. Before I go any further with this story, there is a content warning, as this may be very triggering for some, as it involves sexual assault, dismemberment, graphic details of the victims, and in several cases there will be pedophilia and necrophilia involved. So just a heads up before we go any further.
Do I want to be here?
You have to.
Oh.
For when Dahmer was a child, some sources said that he was deprived of attention, while others suggest he was generally doted upon as a child by both his parents. His mother suffered from depression and demanded constant attention from his father, who was constantly away for studies. Dahmer had been an energetic and happy kid, but became notably subdued as the years went on. From an early age, Dahmer has developed a fascination to dead animals, going as far as to start his own personal collection, and even preserving the bones he would collect in formaldehyde.
That's something every normal kid would do.
Definitely.
Yeah, when I was a kid, I
Collected chestnuts.
collected rocks, bro. I went out, saw a pretty rock, and like, oh, I'll take that home.
I saw chestnuts under the tree. Keep them in a corner. Definitely not bones, though. When Dahmer reached puberty, he discovered that he was gay. And he soon became fantasizing about dominating and controlling a completely submissive male partner in his early to mid-teens. And his masturbatory fantasies gradually evolved to him focusing on chests and torsos.
Like big chests and little torsos, or little torso, little chest?
I think it's just chests and torsos in general.
Oh.
All shapes and sizes.
I mean...
And we can see from his victim, he does not discriminate either.
Okay.
These fantasies gradually became intertwined with dissection.
Oh, that's so normal.
His first attempt to attack and render an individual submissive to him happened when he was about 16. He fantasized of rendering a particular male jogger who he found attractive, unconscious, and then making sexual use of his body. He went as far as to conceal himself in the bushes with a baseball bat and wait for the jogger to pass. However, on that particular day, the jogger did not appear. Good for him.
Jesus.
Good for him.
I'm so happy for that jogger.
His first murder was committed in 1978, 3 weeks after his high school graduation.
That's a bit of an odd celebration for graduating.
Yeah, high school too, not university, high school. He picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was 18 years old. Stephen agreed to accompany Dahmer to his house upon the promise of a few beers with Dahmer as he had the house to himself, home alone.
I would never go to someone's house after just meeting them.
Definitely not.
They're like the same age, right? Because he just graduated.
He just graduated, so he would be maybe a little younger, 17, almost 18. Stephen was 18. And after they arrived at the house, they had been drinking, talking for a few hours and listening to music. Stephen expressed that he wanted to leave. Time to go. But Dahmer didn't want him to go. He proceeded to bludgeon Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell twice.
Jesus!
From behind. And as Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar of the dumbbell. He then stripped the clothes from Hicks' body before exposing his chest with his hands, then masturbating as he stood above the corpse. After all that, he dragged the body to his basement.
Oh, it's nasty. Wait, so he was dead by then?
He was strangled to death by the dumbbell.
Nah, no thank you. Necrophilia is a no-go.
The following day, Dahmer dissected Hicks' body in his basement. He later buried the remains in a shallow grave in his backyard. And several weeks later, he unearthed the remains and pared the flesh from the bones.
Pared?
Basically, filleted him.
Oh! That's... Oh!
He dissolved the flesh in acid before flushing the solution down the toilet. He crushed the bones with a sledgehammer and scattered them in the woodlands behind the family house. And he threw Hicks's necklace and the knife used to dismember him from the West Bath Road Bridge into the Cuyahoga River.
That's... Honestly, that's a very thorough...
He definitely thought of this.
Oh, yeah.
It was definitely planned.
Oh, he thought about it.
It was very meticulously planned to eliminate all possibilities.
To have that acid to break the bones, scatter them.
And
then
throw and destroy any traces of evidence, even of Hicks's existence, basically. And after that, he didn't kill anyone for a few years. Dahmer then went and served in the army for a very short amount of time before he received a honorable discharge because of his alcohol abuse.
Not a good sign.
After his discharge from the army, he traveled a bit collecting minor offenses until he got hired as a mixer at the Milwaukee Amberosa chocolate factory.
Don't ruin chocolate for me.
After settling into his new life, he started to frequent gay bars, gay bathhouses, and bookstores. And by late 1985, Dahmer had begun a regularly frequent at the bathhouses, which he later described as being the relaxing places. But during his sexual encounters, he became frustrated at his partner's moving during the act. Following his arrest, he stated, "I trained myself to view people as objects of pleasure instead of as people."
No.
For this reason, beginning in June 1986, he administered sleeping pills to his partners, giving them liquor laced with sedatives. He then waited for his partners to fall asleep before performing various sexual acts. To maintain an adequate supply of this medication, Dahmer informed doctors he worked nights and required the tablets to adjust to the schedule.
Nah. Nuh-uh.
After approximately 12 such instances, the bathhouse's administration revoked Dahmer's membership.
Good.
And he began to use hotel rooms to continue this practice.
You know what? Good for the people that took away his membership.
At least it means they noticed and are, aware of what's happening within their facilities.
Did they, file a report against him?
Well, I guess those places aren't exactly that legal themselves.
Oh, that's fair.
So they couldn't really file anything.
I mean...
The most they could do is revoke his membership.
This is... No. I mean, to drug someone's drink.
Yeah.
And, the people would notice, too.
Yeah.
Because they'd be out of it.
Mm-hmm. And then they wake up and just be like, where was I? And then...
They'd probably just assume that they drank too much.
Yeah. But yeah,
I am not going to clubs. Not in Canada, at least. Hell no.
The later murders he committed were in his late 20s to early 30s, with Stephen Tomey being his pivotal incident that unleashed the monster. Tomey was a 25-year-old man who Dahmer met at a bar and persuaded him to accompany him to his hotel room where Dahmer had rented for the evening. According to Dahmer, he had no intention of killing Tomey, but intended to simply drug him and lie beside him as he explored his body. The following morning, Dahmer woke to find Taomi lying beneath him on the bed, his chest crushed in and black and blue with bruises. Blood was seeping from the corner of his mouth, and Dahmer's fists and one forearm were extremely bruised.
Oh my god.
Dahmer later said that he had no memory of having killed Taomi,
I have no memory of killing someone.
and that he could not believe this had happened. His words.
Oh my god, how did this happen? I'm above a dead guy with caved in ribs, and I have a bruised fist and forearm. Forearm? How do you bruise your forearm? Oh, fighting back, probably.
Probably.
Hopefully.
I hope. No, maybe not. I'm gonna drug
drugged.
them. Drug them.
How do you bruise your forearm?
Dahmer transported the body in a large suitcase from the hotel to his house, and 1 week later, he severed the head, arms, and legs, then filleted the bones from the body before cutting the flesh into pieces small enough to handle, which he later disposed of. After 2 weeks, Dahmer boiled the head in a mixture of Solex, an alkali-based industrial detergent, and bleach in an effort to retain the skull, which he then used as stimulus for masturbation. Eventually, the skull became too brittle by this bleaching process, so Dahmer pulverized and disposed of it.
So he was pleasuring himself to a skull.
That he retrieved from killing his victim.
To a skull?
Yes, indeed.
Bones.
Mm-hmm.
But like, bones? To a skull. That is
Yes.
unimaginable.
He is a sick
and
man. That's
very
all I
disgusting.
can say. Disgusting, indeed. And this event marks the beginning of his terror. Often what he would do was offer money to his victims to pose for nude pictures. Then he would drug them before or shortly after engaging in sexual activities with them. And once his victims were unconscious, he would strangle them to death. And to consider about the time for this episode, we do not have the intended time to go in depth with all of the heinous methods of torture.
I actually don't mind not hearing about it.
Yeah, you probably don't want to.
Yeah, you know, maybe in the far future there'll
Yeah.
just be this really in-depth
In-depth
like,
talk on it.
2-hour
Probably, yes. If I added in all of the methods he has used to torture the victims, not just the victims, but their corpse.
I'm assuming you are very creative with the ways that he did his thing.
Definitely. So, I will be doing a list to pay respect to all the victims that lost their lives to the hands of this monster. Shortly after Stephen Taomi, there was Jamie Dexter, who was 14 years old. Richard Guerrero, who was 25. Anthony Seals, who was 24, and was also the first victim from whom he permanently retained any body parts, which included Sears' head and genitalia, which he preserved in acetone.
That's
Then there is Raymond Smith, who was 33. This murder happened in 1990, which was also when Dahmer started documenting his murders with Polaroid cameras. Soon after Eddie Smith, who was 28 years old. Then there was Ernest Miller, who was 24, and David Thomas, who was 23 years old, and a father of 2. After Thomas, Dahmer took a 5-month break with unsuccessful attempts of luring other people back with him during this period.
good.
In February of 1991, there was Curtis Strader, who was 18. Then Earl Lindsay, who was 19 when he was lured back to Dahmer's apartment, where he was drugged, then had holes drilled into his skull, which were then injected with hydrochloric acid. Lindsay was later killed via strangulation and was dismembered.
Honestly, at that point, I'm so happy that he was put out of his misery.
Honestly,
Because
yes.
I could not imagine having holes drilled in my head while I'm assuming he's awake. And
Yes.
having hydrochloric acid?
Hydrochloric acid.
Oh, having that dumped into your skull.
Mm-hmm. The main reason for many of these, like, skull drilling experiments that Dahmer would do was he wanted someone who is essentially a zombie. Someone who is alive, but will not move during the act, and would basically be his pet.
Dude, I mean, at that point, just find a submissive person who would listen. It doesn't have to be forced. I mean, like, this is nasty.
Yeah.
All he had to do was be a good person. I'm sure he would have found anyone. But to drug people and force them and then kill them, there's no way he was going to get what he wanted at that pace.
Definitely not. Then there was Anthony Hughes, who was 31 years old, and following him was Kanarak Sindamosambone, who was only 14 at the time of his killing.
Oh, 2 14-year-old boys?
Yes. And Kanarak was one of the most familiar names in this case because of an incident involving Milwaukee police on May 29th, 1991, where Kanarak was returned to Dahmer by the police after Dahmer convinced them that the boy was 19 and drunk, and the two of them were in a relationship.
He is 14. He is a boy. He is a child. What the fuck?
Kanarak was later killed by injection of hydrochloric acid to the frontal lobe. Then, during Dahmer's travel to Chicago, he met Matt Turner, who was 20 years old. And after his return, he met Jeremiah Weinberger, who was 23. Oliver Lacey, who was 23 at the time he was murdered, and his last victim was Joseph Braidholst, who was 25 and was strangled to death and left laying on Dahmer's bed, covered with a bedsheet, for 2 days. And upon Dahmer's return, he found his head covered in maggots, and he was also dismembered at the end. Dahmer approached 3 men in July 22nd in 1991 and offered $100 to accompany him to his apartment to pose for nude photographs, drink beer, and simply keep him company. One person from the trio agreed, who was 23-year-old Tracy Edwards. He was found by 2 Milwaukee police officers after having flagged them down with a handcuff attached to his wrist. He initially only wanted the officers to remove the cuffs, yet the officers' keys could not work, and eventually they asked Edwards to accompany the officers to the apartment where he had fled from. They arrived at the apartment, and Dahmer opened the door and let them in. The officers and Tracy walked in and pointed out some of the things he has seen during the 5 hours he was held in Dahmer's house.
5 hours?
He was held there for 5 hours.
Jesus.
These things included the Polaroids of the victims, which Dahmer displayed in his bedroom.
He displayed them?
He displayed them.
While also bringing back other people.
Yes.
He wasn't... Well, he was going to kill him anyways, so...
Different body parts he has kept from his victims, and the most damning evidence they found in his room was a blue bucket in the corner of the room that contained the still dissolving body parts of his previous victims. And they discovered it because it smelled so bad. Because the whole room was stinking up because of that bucket.
Okay, that is disgusting. Terrible.
After they found these evidence, Dahmer was taken into custody and was soon on trial for the murders.
Good. No way that man was gonna walk free again.
Yeah. When his verdict was announced in the courtroom, a wave of cries was heard from the victims' families. Dahmer's defense lawyer had pled for insanity, yet after several psych evaluations done on him, they came to the conclusion that Dahmer does have borderline personality disorder, schizotypal personality disorder, and a psychotic disorder, but he was still found legally sane at his trial, as what he did may not be seen as sane in basically everybody's eyes, but he was aware of what he was doing and still proceeded to do what he did. Because normally people with necrophilic tendencies or urges, they would work in an environment that would gain them access to dead bodies or corpses, like mortuary assistants, working in the morgue, working in the graveyard, or something like that. But he was never detected as someone who would do these crimes because he worked at a chocolate factory.
I don't think I'm going to be eating chocolate for a while after this. But, like, to plead... So if he claimed that he didn't... Or he didn't want to do it, but he had to do it, like that kind of thing, then he would have been able to plead insanity.
Well...
Because he knows he wants to do it, and he did it.
Yeah. And I think this case in particular, why he was that quickly, not only because there was so many evidence pointing, obviously, the evidence that he has...
Where he lived.
Yeah, he has done that many things to that many victims. It's also because he himself pled that he was guilty.
He pled for himself that he was guilty.
Yes. And he was held in the prison for several months. And throughout those months, every single day, every few days, he would call up the detective saying, I remember something. He said that he's doing this to bring closure to the victims' families, to all the people that he has killed. So every few days, he would call the detective saying, oh, I remember something else. Oh, I remember this other person I killed.
So he wanted to be, like, caught, I'd assume. And then he wants to bring closure, but...
He's a very contradicting man. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to get, caught. But once he did get caught, because the officers entered into his apartment, the whole apartment was filled with evidence.
No, I mean, he was done for.
There was no way of him explaining his way out of why he would have pictures of dismembered body parts and people's severed heads soaking in jars of formaldehyde or acetone. Like, there's no way to explain those types of things.
I don't think he could have pled insanity if he was doing all of that.
Because he knew what he was doing.
He was fully conscious.
And during his whole entire trial, where people were gathering evidence and, the jury was deciding, he pled that he was guilty. So there was no questioning that he was conscious of what he was doing while he was doing the acts.
That's...
And another point people took into consideration for him to be found sane was that he sought out to kill people and then had to do things to their bodies instead of finding dead bodies and doing things to them. So that was what ultimately determined that he was sane for the trial.
That's... no.
He was convicted for 15 of the 16 homicides he had committed in Wisconsin and was sentenced to 15 life sentences on February 17th of 1992.
How is it 15? We're getting there.
We're getting there.
We're getting there.
He was later sentenced to a 16th life sentence for the additional homicide committed in Ohio in 1978. The first murder. He was in prison for a total of 2.5 years before he was beaten to death by Christopher Scarver, who was a fellow inmate at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Portage, Wisconsin.
Can't say I'm upset about that.
No. We can say that Jeffrey has lived a life raining terror upon his community and has definitely left his mark in history as the Milwaukee Cannibal.
I mean, you kill and do stuff to people's bodies. 16 people.
Mm-hmm. Ranging from 14-year-olds all the way up to 33-year-olds.
Did he eat them?
Well, there were evidence found that he would keep them in the fridge, and, yeah.
Oh.
There was also evidence that he ate his victims.
Oh.
Which is why he got the name the Milwaukee Cannibal.
I was gonna say.
Yeah.
Cannibal.
Mm-hmm.
That's, very disgusting. I really don't know what else to say about it, but it is absolutely horrid and disgusting.
Yeah. And I also feel like for the case, the most infamous victim in this case, Canorac, it was very, very depressing to know that he could have survived.
No. To hear that someone could have survived, but didn't. It's
the police found him in a state of like supposed drunkenness and like
he was drugged.
He was not only drugged, but he also had holes drilled into his head.
Wait, when they found him, he had holes in his head.
He was bleeding from the head because he survived a round of injection to the skull.
Oh my god.
Yet the police just thought that he was drunk, stumbled over, scraped his head, started bleeding.
Well, okay, but like, if you're bleeding from the head, wouldn't you be taken to a hospital? Like, either way, you're bleeding from the head. You could have, like, brain trauma and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But
the police still let him go back with Dahmer, and he was killed.
Dude, nah, that's... No.
There were also records that the paramedics were called and arrived and assessed Canorac and stated that they would like him to go to the hospital. But because he was like
supposedly 19,
and also the fact that he wasn't really conscious of what he was really doing because he was supposedly drunk, Dahmer made the decision for him because they were supposedly in a relationship, which eventually led to Canorac being killed via the injections, a second round of injections to his frontal lobe.
Dude, but like this guy with holes and acid in his head was able to get out of the apartment and find police, but then nothing happens.
And he escaped, yet he was sent back to hell.
He could have survived.
He could have survived.
Oh my god.
Another fun fact, not very fun in these circumstances, but years ago, Dahmer had actually been arrested and was registered as a sex offender because of his case where he touched Conorac's older brother.
Oh, so he had history with the family.
Yes. He touched him, and Conorac's older brother was 13 at the time.
Oh my god. So he was younger than Conorac.
Yes. And it was also public indecency because he whipped it out in public in front of kids.
Oh, multiple kids.
Kids.
Oh my god.
Plural. Yes. That would conclude the case of Jeffrey Dahmer. Some people would say that it's how he ended his life was too light of a sentence.
He didn't end his life.
Yeah.
Someone ended it for him. Thank you, by the way.
But nothing can actually, like, no types of karma would ever be equivalent to what he has done to all those young men.
I mean, torture. I mean, that's, like, inhumane.
Inhumane.
But, like, what he did to the people was tortured.
Yes.
So, I mean, what you've done to other people should have been done to you. Like that kind of logic. Inhumane logic.
Inhumane logic.
I
Yep.
mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
he was a very sick man.
I don't even want to call him a man. Monster would be a better way to describe him. And this concludes the case of the Milwaukee cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Let us know what you guys want us to talk about next, if it ever happens. Once again, I was your co-host, Angela.
And I was your host, Sophie. Tune in for our next episode.
Coming in a week.
Yeah.
Alright, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I was going to say like Tenzin.
We're cutting that out.
You had pet rock when you were young?
No, I collected pretty rocks.
Pet rocks.
No. They weren't pets. Why the fuck would I keep a pet rock? This reminds me of fucking Elmo. Yo, meet my pet Rocky.
Okay.
He then threw Hicks's necklace and the knife used to dismember him from the West Bath Road Bridge into the Cuyahoga.
Bones.
Mm-hmm. They don't move.
They don't look like anything. It's just bones.
They don't move. They don't move. Crazy.
Cheryl, did you know bones don't move? Bones don't move. A skull, it just doesn't move.
Yeah, bro. They don't move.
Shut the fuck up, we're recording.